Hi, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know. This is a podcast about classical things, old books, old paintings, old stuff, and mostly old thinkers. And our goal is to educate all of you folks in a way that's not terrible. And that's mostly what we're trying to do here. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes it's terrible. My name is AJ Hannenberg. I am here with my compatriots, Graham Donaldson.
Hello.
And Thomas Magby.
Hi.
And we all teach at a classical school in Austin, Texas called Veritas Academy. And you can check us out online at patreon.com/classicalstuff. You can help support us there if you want to. You can also see our website, classicalstuff.net. And you can check us out on the twits, at CLSSCAL stuff. And then there's one more, right, that I'm forgetting. What's the last?
Email us at
email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. Same website I mentioned before. And so today,
welcome back, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
y'all
been
thawed out, boys?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. We finally have power and water, so I can't complain. But
yeah, there was a little delay there. We kind of got snowed in, and then our school fell to pieces, and so we weren't allowed in for a little while, and that's where all our recording equipment is.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah.
Poor Thomas got the worst of
I was
it.
going to say, you lost power for like 30 minutes, and you had rolling blackouts, but
30 minutes is a stretch.
well, it wasn't even that.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
I think it was like, I was like, hey, I think power just went out, and everyone's like, oh, really? And that was the worst.
But you were without it for like
days. Yeah.
days.
Yeah,
Like
anyway, it was great. Yeah,
140 hours or something.
that sounds right. By that point, we had gone to stay with friends.
That's insane.
Yeah, it wasn't great. But yeah, we made it through that, and now we are back in the school. So, hi, everyone.
Yeah, our poor school, a pipe froze. No, something froze, and then it tripped our sprinkler system.
Yeah, the sprinkler system burst.
The sprinkler system burst, and then
poured water onto the second floor, which got down, hit the second floor, went down to the first floor, caused water damage on both. But yeah, the repair crews have been incredible.
Yeah, but that's where we've been. Poor classical stuff. Anyway, we're back, and we're excited to keep on regurgitating the 5 same topics over and over again.
Yeah. So for all you who've been listening to the backlog, it's about to sound pretty similar. Is that okay? Wonderful?
Hey, I mean, you should keep listening.
And on that note, we're going to talk about Milton. No.
Is that actually true?
Yes, we are talking about Milton.
Are we actually?
Well, so I've just finished teaching the book again for another year.
We are the stereotype. I love it.
And something there was something that came up in one of the speeches or one of the conversations between the angel Michael and Adam at the end of the book. And I didn't really bring it up in class because we have other fish to fry in class, but I was thinking about it. And it marks this change in Adam. So just sort of setting it up, this is after the fall, right before God sent Michael down to kick everybody out of the garden. And Adam's in a rough spot because he just caused entire generations to be filled with sin. And he's like, everyone's going to curse my name. All my kids are going to be like, so why am I born? And the angel Michael has given Adam a vision of the future to comfort him. And he showed him a vision of from Adam to the flood. And that's not very comforting. Adam's like, oh gosh, it's so bad. But then after the flood, then we move on to the story of Abraham, and then everything's moving up to Christ. And then the angel gives him a vision of the world, of the church, and Milton, being a Protestant, says some not very nice things about Catholics, which I don't really talk about in class.
Right.
And then he sort of has a vision about the end of the age, and he basically shows Adam all of history, and Adam at the end is like, I'm incredibly satisfied. And so he has this big old speech, and I want to look at that speech because it's such a change from Adam before the fall. And I want to hear your guys' opinions on this. The place I want to land and end up in is as people who have faith, as Christians who believe that relationship with Christ and contemplation of the divine and a life of the gospel is happiness. That is the telos. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Then what place is there for education? What place is there for science, for understanding, for progress in history and these kinds of things? Because this is sort of a tension that I think exists in the Christian faith that I don't really know how to square. But anyway, That's kind of the question that I want to get to, but I feel like I need to set the stage with Milton first.
Okay.
So we have these sort of two versions of Adam, and I don't know if it's a maturation of Adam as it goes on, but it's definitely a change. So, and it's sort of bookended, or it's between these two conversations that Adam has with divine beings. So the first conversation Adam has, this big old conversation with the angel Raphael, who's been sent by God on a mission, and his mission is to warn Adam that Satan is in the garden.
Okay.
So Raphael's warning Adam, hey man, there's like a snake prowling around your garden. You gotta like be careful about this. And then the second is God has sent Michael to talk to Adam to kick him out of the garden and to provide him comfort and direction because Adam is he's bummed out. And in the first conversation with Raphael, and sort of I need to do a little hat tip to Josh Gibbs, who has talked about this. I don't know if he talked about this in any of his books, but he just talked about it on some lectures and stuff.
About this section of Paradise Lost?
Just about that bringing up these two conversations between these two angels.
Okay.
Showcases kind of Adam's different reaction to... Well, he basically, he talks about it by saying, like, Michael and Raphael present these two different kinds of being a teacher, and so he takes it in that direction. But when Raphael talks to Michael, Michael doesn't hear when Raphael talks to Adam, Adam doesn't hear the warning of the snake because Adam is filled with questions and curiosity about the heavens, what stars are made of, why they move in a predictable way, what angels are made of, do angels eat? Do angels get married like I'm married to Eve? He's filled with all of these sorts of questions. And this is not out of character for Adam. In the beginning of Paradise Lost before the fall, the character of Adam really is kind of presented as that medieval or that classical understanding of man that is wanting to understand. The best example that I could think of is, you guys may need to Google this. If you're at home, you may need to look at it. It's called the Flammarion engraving. Now, the Flammarion engraving is not medieval, although it's made to look medieval. It was in a book that was in the 19th century, I think. But the author...
1888.
Yeah, but the author who has it in his book, he was convinced that it came from like the 16th century Germany. Oh. Nobody really knows. So it could be a 19th century thing. But the picture of it is kind of what is the example that I sort of think of Adam. And for those of you who are listening to a podcast, it is an engraving of a man who's wearing a robe, and he's on his hands and knees, and he's crawled to the edge of the sky, sort of this dome of the sky with all the night stars. And he's gotten his hands and knees, and he's sort of broken through the night sky, and he's peering at the sort of the wheels upon wheels in the background of the heavens. So he's sort of like broken through space. He's broken through the night sky, and he's looking at, I don't know, like almost like the gears of creation, or he's looking at
it looks like the spheres.
Yeah, he's looking at the spheres.
Yeah,
then that's what it is. So he's looking at the spheres, and he's trying to understand how the heavens work and the heavenly spheres. And so
it's not quite the spheres, because if we're talking strictly medieval, the stars are at the furthest edge.
Yes, so it's
a little bit goofy.
Yeah, and that's probably this is more typified of the 19th century understanding of like the man's search for physics and that kind of thing.
Right.
But the idea is still the same, that human beings are, and this is part of Paradise Lost, are created with this innate sense of wanting to know and wanting to sort of have your experience. Wanting to know how the heavens work, staring up at the stars and wondering how these things work. And the Flammarion engraving, I always hold it up in my mind as kind of like the picture example of that vision of mankind. And this is what Adam is like. When Adam is first created in Paradise Lost, the very first thing he sees in the sky is the sun. And he looks at it for a little bit and sees that the sun is moving. And that sort of has begun his fascination with the heavens. And then as he goes on, he tests his own body, and he runs and he leaps. And on his first day, he sort of reasons and logics his way through who he is and he comes to the conclusion, I must have been made by someone who loves me, which is kind of already a really fascinating thought.
Right.
He says, because I exist in a place that is so good and it was made for me and I'm happy here and I didn't cause myself, whoever caused me must be good. This is what Adam concludes. So he's got this would that be inductive or deductive there, Logic Berg?
Sounds like deductive, but yeah, because he's not really extrapolating from a pattern to a general rule. It's premise to conclusion.
Yeah. And so you can sort of see that he comes sort of built with the tools of inquiry, and he comes built with the heart of wanting to know.
Right.
All off the bat. This is not something that happens after the fall, or this is not a cause of sin. This is how human beings are made. And then and as he names all the animals, he then comes to the conclusion, hey, I don't have a companion like, Mr. and Mrs. Dog have each other and Mr. and Mrs. Duck have each other, and I don't have anybody. And there's this really, really delightful scene where he and God engage in this rhetorical back and forth where where Adam says to God, hey, I noticed that all the animals have a partner, and I was wondering if I could have a partner. And God's like, but you have me. And Adam's like, good point, but God, you're not a person,
right, yeah.
And you're God, and you got that whole Trinity thing going on inside of you, and I don't have that. No, he says, yeah. So, and God's like, well, I'm alone. He's like, no, you got the Trinity going on. And so they have this little back and forth and at the end, God's like, I was just seeing I just wanted you to know. I just wanted you to basically
appreciate your gift when you got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
You need to see your need before I give you something you don't need.
Right.
Exactly.
Although I'm surprised that God wasn't like, look, man, just wait till you invent the microscope. There's plenty of asexual reproduction happening. Mr. Amoeba doesn't need a Mrs. Amoeba, if you catch my drift.
But anyway, so Adam sort of reasons by observation that he would be happier with a thing that doesn't exist, with the creature that currently doesn't exist, Eve. And so Adam comes pre-built with all of these tools of inquiry and the desire and curiosity to know. And the reason I'm laboring this is because this isn't something that comes after the fall or is given to mankind as a coping mechanism for living outside the garden. No. As far as Milton is concerned, this is a core part of the pre-fallen person, is that they want to know things and have this innate curiosity. Okay, cool. That's Adam before the fall.
Okay.
But when Adam talks to Raphael and Raphael's giving him a warning, listen, there's a devil in your garden, you got to be careful. Adam's like, awesome, totally, I heard you the first time. So stars, how do they work exactly? And there's 4 books in Paradise Lost of just Adam's questions to Raphael, where he's like, tell me about how the heavens were made. Tell me why did God make things move in order? Is
Raphael answering these questions?
He is. And then eventually Raphael gets to a point where he's like, I'm not answering any more of your questions. You're this is, we're kind of wasting time. And Raphael then asks Adam a question. He's like, hey, how would you tell me your first memory? And Adam's like, oh, cool. And that is a very good trick that a teacher can do if a student keeps asking you annoying questions, is to say hey, tell me a story. No, don't do that.
Or at least to pose a question back.
Or pose a question back, yeah. But anyway, so you get this sense that Adam, even though he is has an inquisitive mind, there's still it's not enough for him to sense the danger or to take the danger seriously.
Right.
That's maybe another topic for another day. But my whole point in this is seeing that Adam sort of comes stamped with this innate desire to know. He is the man on his hands and knees wanting to poke his head through the heavens to see how things work. There's nothing wrong about this. Okay. But at the end, and this is the passage I want to read, is Adam... after the fall, Adam has a serious conversation with Eve where they just contemplate killing themselves. They're like, wow. What's the point? What's the point? Right. All of our children are going to hate us. And the only reason they don't is because God promised, they remember that when God cursed them and the snake, that part of the snake's curse was that the seed of Adam and Eve will one day crush the snake's head. And they're like, we should probably wait around for that. Let's
yeah, because down with that snake, am I right? Let's get him back.
Exactly. So they say, okay, well, God has said that he's got a plan, and so it would be even worse if we killed ourselves. Let's not do that.
Right.
But regardless, Eve is shattered and is asleep from all of book 10. or book 11. And Adam laments and has this big old long speech where he's like, all the future generations are going to hate me and they're going to get kicked out of the garden. And they're just like, they're in a really depressed place. So much so that God says to Michael, okay, when you kick him out of the garden, try to like cheer him up a little bit.
Yeah.
And the way that Michael does this is to give them a vision of the rest of history.
Okay.
He basically gives them the vision of the understanding of history the way the Bible presents it. That there was a creation, there was the fall. God chose a group of people to pass on his law to. From that group of people was going to come, he was going to be born into, and his son, that son was going to die to save all of creation. And then there was this age where some would believe and some wouldn't. And then there would be some sort of final culmination in history. And book 11 and 12 show this story. And Adam, at one point, when Adam hears about Christ dying on the cross, he says, I don't know if I should be sad about the sin or be rejoicing that this happens, which is always a really interesting question to ask the 10th graders.
Right.
But when this whole thing is done, Adam says this.
When the whole vision is...
The whole vision is done. And so now it's like, there's the end of history. And Adam, comforted, says this. Adam last replied, how soon hath thy prediction, seer blessed, measured this transient world, the race of time till time stand fixed? Beyond is all abyss, eternity, whose end no eye can reach. Greatly instructed, I shall hence depart, greatly in peace of thought, and have my fill of knowledge, what this vessel can contain, beyond which was my folly to aspire. Henceforth I learn that to obey is best, and love with fear the only God, to walk as in his presence, ever to observe his providence, and on him soul depend, merciful over all his works, with good still overcoming evil, and by small accomplishing great things, by things deemed weak subverting worldly strong, and worldly wise by simply meek. That suffering for truth's sake is fortitude to highest victory, and to the faithful, death, the gate of life. Taught this by his example, whom I now acknowledge my Redeemer, ever blessed. So Adam basically has a speech where he's like, I don't need to know anything else.
He got the thing he was looking for.
I got the thing. He says, and now I know that what is fulfilling is obedience and essentially being small and persevering to the end. Right. And by being small, having God accomplish big things through the small.
Sure.
And by a small accomplishing great things, by things deemed weak, subverting worldly strong. So by being obedient to God, and not striving after these things that he said were folly, suffering for truth's sake, and then waiting, and then where death ends up being the gate of life. Right. So this is what Adam says at the end, which is very different in tenor to what Adam was like earlier, where he wants to know everything. And then Michael ends this section with a passage that every 10th grader in my class memorizes. And so Adam kind of puts a cherry on top of Adam's vision. Michael puts a cherry on top of Adam's vision of what now mankind, in light of this knowledge, should do. And Michael says, this having learned, thou hast attained the sum of wisdom. Hope no higher, though all the stars thou knowest by name, and all the ethereal powers, all secrets of the deep, all nature's works, or works of God in heaven, air, earth, or sea, and all the riches of this world enjoyest, and all the rule one empire. Only add deeds to thy knowledge answerable, add faith, add virtue, patience, temperance, add love, by name to come called charity, the soul of all the rest. Then wilt thou not be loath to leave this paradise, but shall contain a paradise within thee, happier far.
Graham did that from memory for those who aren't watching online.
Wait, so one more time?
This having learned. No. So Michael kind of says, yes, if you take that mindset that obedience is best, and now you know that even if, he's like, now that you've learned that lesson, you don't need empires, you don't need You don't need to know all the stars by name. You don't need to know all the ethereal powers, all secrets of the deep. You don't need to know that stuff. Even if you had it, it's not going to add anything to it. And he says, with that knowledge, now add virtuous deeds. Faith, virtue, temperance, love, charity. And if you do that, so if you're the kind of person that has that obedience and has that life of virtuous deeds, then the Garden of Eden will be inside of you, and you're not going to be sad to leave the garden. The garden is going to be inside of you. You will carry paradise within you, which is a big parallel to Satan, who spends a big part of book 4 talking about how he's carrying hell within him.
Right.
So you almost have this this setup of there's two kinds of way to exist in the world: the Satan way, where you carry hell within you, or the post-knowledge Adam way, where you carry paradise within you by being obedient and living a life of virtue. And so I don't really know how to square these two almost like depictions of man. Is because on the one hand, you have striving man who wants to learn about the heavens and the universe, and Milton's not saying that that's bad. Like, that is how man was made.
Right.
And almost, classical education hangs on the fact that we as human beings want to know things.
Right.
But on the other hand, and this is not an uncommon question from students, in fact, it was one of the questions we got in one of our AMAs that you can listen to if you become a Patreon subscriber at Patreon/classical stuff.
Patreon.com/classical stuff. Yeah.
Classical stuff is, okay, if you have the gospel, if you have the Bible, why do you need anything else? Why do you need other books? Why do you need other pursuits? If this is not satisfying, then since it's supposed to be satisfying for the Christian man, then why pursue other things? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's my discomfort with that sentiment from Michael at the end. So when Adam's given that vision, he responds joyfully. He's excited, happy to see it. I could also see someone despairing at that point, because it means Adam and Eve will die before any of those things happen. They don't get to... Yes, they've seen what will happen, but then their lives almost mean nothing at this point. They need to have children so that this future point can be attained. But like, what else matters from their life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, there is, like Adam and Eve cry at the end, like when they leave the garden, they're sad.
Sure.
But they're not so despairing that there's nothing, that there's nothing to look forward to. There is still a plan going on.
Yes. But I've had students describe themselves as Christian nihilists, by which they mean that it's essentially a form of stoicism, I would say, where it's, essentially nothing matters. Most things in life don't matter, except the story that God is building out, wherein all things are eventually restored to Him at the end of time, right? So they don't have to be freaking out after bad test grades, because in the grand scheme of history, it doesn't matter. I want you to push back on that. I don't like this viewpoint.
Neither do I. But what don't we like about it?
Me personally, it's like a laziness. So I guess the part I want to get further with is that Adam is still seeing the importance of his small acts, and I guess I want to hear more about that. He doesn't have a hopeless reaction, or he doesn't have a reaction that says, therefore, all that matters is me having kids, right? Because he needs to get to that point in history. It's everything I'm doing now matters because it prepares this final moment in history.
I don't even know if it's that. I don't even know if it's like I get to be a little stepping stone or a little link on the chain of history. Right. I wonder. So when I was thinking about this, how I wrote it down, and I was sort of doing it kind of tongue in cheek, but maybe there's something to it. It's like there's an inherent tension in the faith between what you would maybe call like mysticism.
Yeah.
So like those that wing of Christianity that says leave the world behind. All you need is contemplation, and you need nothing but prayer and divine contemplation, and that is sort of what we were made for, and that is a satisfying thing. Right. And we as Protestants, we just don't really have that rich a tradition of that. I've been rereading for those listeners, a book recommendation. I've been rereading Laurus. Did you read Laurus?
No.
Hamburg, did you read Laurus? Yeah, you did. You didn't like it, did you, Hamburg?
I pretty much loved it.
Oh, really? I thought you like.
Why would I not like Loris? It's delightful.
I thought you read it and stopped reading it because you thought.
No, it was great.
Maybe I'm thinking of someone different. Did you
I
read
enjoyed
it?
it.
You didn't read it.
I did not read it. I thought because it was all three English teachers got a copy, right? Wasn't. I don't know if Catherine was the one who didn't like it.
Oh,
I think
maybe
she
Catherine
did.
didn't like it.
Yeah,
but anyway, it tells a story of medieval Russian Orthodox man who's a healer, but it's basically the story of him slowly becoming
Arseny, right?
Yeah, Arseny, slowly becoming a mystic. And then by the end of the book, he's like one of those holy fools that you would see in a Dostoevsky novel, someone who just lives in the forest and spouts wisdom. But it's a story of like how this person becomes like that.
Right.
And so I've been reading that and thinking about him not really caring about history and not really caring about, I don't know, progress or science or knowledge, and just wanting to be someone who contemplates and spends time with God, versus this vision that we have of the pre-fall Adam, of someone who wants to know how the world works and is curious and uses logic and reason to deduce things and can and clearly is made this way, and that his rationality is not because of the fall, but is part of his pre-made wiring. Yeah. And I'm just wondering how we kind of like hold those two things together.
I got some ideas.
Okay, let's hear it.
And then I got a question for Beezers. So first, I think that this passage, I looked it up. I went and grabbed my copy and did a little reading.
Your copy's way nicer than mine, brother.
It does. It has pictures, which is important. It actually has woodcuts by, what's his name? The Italian... Gustave Doré.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Go check out Doré's woodcuts. He does all kinds of good stuff. He did one for the Bible, some for Dante. Anyway.
For Dante, yeah.
So there's one section in here that I think can shed some extra light here. Let's see. He says, after seeing this vision of the future from Michael.
This is Milton says?
This is Milton, and it's Adam talking.
Adam is the character, yeah, okay.
So, and you actually read this bit. He said, "How soon hath thy prediction, seer blessed, measured this transient world, the race of time, till time stand fixed." Like, you've shown me it all. Beyond is all abyss, eternity whose no eye can reach. Greatly instructed, I shall hence depart, greatly in peace of thought, and have my fill of knowledge what this vessel can contain, beyond which was my folly to aspire. And so I think one thing that helps to add a little bit of color to this post-vision Adam and post-fall Adam is that he has seen basically the fill of human knowledge. He knows all of history future. He knows what's coming. He knows the progress we make. He knows that we invent iPads. Like, he has all this stuff, and he knows exactly where everything is headed. And so he has sort of been filled with that knowledge of the temporal, and that knowledge that the bit where he says, beyond which was my folly to aspire, it is my impression that what he is referring there to is not the sciences. He is referring to the knowledge of good and evil, right? It was that thing that was promised to him by the snake. You can be heavenly and go beyond human knowledge. He has just received a vision of pretty much all human knowledge. He knows exactly where we're headed. And that little bit, greatly instructed, I shall hence depart, I think there are a couple pieces to that instruction. First is that he has seen what is coming in human history. Like, after being shown the entirety of human history, that's a pretty good instruction on science. And the second piece of instruction is this humility. He says, in light of this, it is good to obey, right? Rather than just in darkness, it is good to obey. And I think that there is the difference. His questions have, in a sense, been answered multiform. One is that you should not aspire to heavenly knowledge. And two is that, like, I've given you this human knowledge. And so if we're to give sort of an analogous reading to what we are doing, we can think of it as the split between, and this is a throwback to a whaled episode, intellectus versus ratio, the two divisions of reason in the human mind. One is the work of sort of getting to knowledge via reason. Adam has just skipped all that, right? He's been handed essentially the keys to the human universe. He is now stuck in intellectus, where his only job is to ponder the truths that he knows. And I think I think there is perhaps some in danger in ratio. There are some knowledges that we are not given, and which it is folly and dangerous to pursue. For example, I am curious about this little folio referenced in Faust, which is a catalog of the devil captains, like demons, what they look like, the words that bring them about, what they do, how to talk to them, how to control demons. I don't think I should touch that manuscript. I think I should stay as far away from it as I possibly can.
Well, that's the one that's in that little locked cupboard in your library, right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that, like, and this is a personal belief, you guys might call me superstitious, but this is the kind of thing where people may treat it academically, but it feels like playing with fire. Like, to treat it academically is to not give it the reverence it perhaps deserves.
Sure.
That, to me, is knowledge I will never seek. And so I think there are pieces of knowledge we may seek, and then there is a point where we are to ponder, where we are to rest in intellectus on certain things that we know. And I think there has to be that combination. As far as I can tell, Adam's ratio has been filled.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, so if we try to apply that to ourselves, like, I feel like every person is going to say, oh, I've perfectly thread the needle between knowing how much ratio is healthy and how much ratio is unhealthy. And, like, I feel like each individual person is arrogant enough, I know I am, to think, oh, well, I know exactly which roads are good to walk down, which roads aren't good to walk down. And so I can kind of like tread that path, wisely. When I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like, when do we know that for Adam, it was like how the heavens work. That seems to be the symbol of the example of things that were folly. Like, Raphael even tells him, he's like, you don't need to know that. Like, it doesn't matter. It's either it doesn't matter or you're not I don't think he says you're not supposed to know it. He just sort of says, like, you don't need to know it.
He says, like, you have this thing. You know that to be obedient is best. Mm-hmm. Anything on top of that is cherries. I don't think he says it's worthless.
Well, this is Michael at the end.
Yeah, this is Michael. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's saying it's worthless. He's saying add anything on top of that, and it's not much of an addition.
Well, it's because you've attained the sum of wisdom. Which
is not the sum of knowledge.
Yeah. And he says, hope no higher, though all the stars thou knowest by name. So it's not like you're not going to learn anything practical, right. Or you're not going to learn anything that's going to
change the way you live.
Fill the soul.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I think pursuing knowledge from that standpoint, you are standing on the firm footing of obedience and assurance of an eternal future. That changes the way that I approach knowledge. Mm-hmm. For me, there is no desperation in it. If I figure out how, a fission battery works and can power all the little doodads everybody walks around with every day, great. If not, also great. We're all going to fall into the sun anyway eventually. So it gives me sort of and this is why I wanted to come back to what Thomas was saying about our students. I'm curious about that, like,
sentiment
where things don't matter, because I think I might land on the other side Thomas does, which is why I'm curious. But I think standing on that firm fitting of an eternal viewpoint changes how we approach knowledge, I think, in a healthy way.
Yes. I think this also, I was just trying to look this up. You'll sometimes see curiosity listed as a sin, I think for this reason of there are only certain things that need to be known, and then there are others that people can pursue as a result of that. I think this is what you're saying. There's a firm foundation you have. You're not hoping for anything beyond how history ends up going. But that doesn't mean that there's not more to study in a specific field, a specific type of work, right? So you can do that not from a place of anxiety, but from a place of, all of this is good. I'm going to explore God's creation.
It goes from a place of anxiety and trust in, like, the self and human progress to a place of worship. When I figure out the fusion battery, I can say, like, oh, dang, God created a really cool thing, rather than look at the great thing I have done.
Yeah.
And aspiring towards divinity myself.
Does the motivation of the person matter? Like, if someone is studying the material world in order to exploit it for comfort and profit versus...
Yeah. I guess, at what level do you mean?
This is something that gets posited all the time in Christian schools talking about their science curriculum or their math curriculum. It's like, when we do this, students will be able to love God more because they will see his world and how he made it. And I just wonder if that's like this is not a criticism of our science department. I'm just saying, like,
I wonder if that's a smoke show.
If that's just a smoke show for, we're going to have science the way that it's taught everywhere else, which is not classical science. It's science and technology. With an emphasis on technology of figuring out how we can be masters over the material world. And
Sorry, I think I used the wrong term. Smoke show is a hot girl.
Oh,
I
yes.
think. A smoke screen. Yeah. It's not a smoke show.
That vision of
science. Total smoke show.
I mean, that vision of science is a smoke show because everyone's like, that's the kind of life I want. Do you get what I'm saying?
When you say classical as opposed to classical science, what do you mean by that?
Okay. So I take this argument. So David Hicks wrote an article called, I can't remember what it's called. It's got some funny name like, "Can classical education actually happen?" or something like that.
And his answer is no.
And his answer is not really.
Right.
It was in an issue of Forma magazine, I think in 2017. But in it, he talks about sort of these 4 pillars of the classical kind of worldview that don't exist anymore. And one of them had to do with an understanding of science. And for him, science in the classical sense is probably better translated for us modern people today as maybe ecology, where the classical understanding of science was the study of nature and the world and how it works so that man can exist in it harmoniously and flourish in nature. That's sort of the classical understanding of science. And then he posits that the modern understanding of science is the understanding of the material world in order to control it and exploit it for comfort and profit, which is pretty cynical, but I mean, he's not far off.
Well, even that I think is changing.
You think so?
I mean, I would say sentiment among especially the younger generations is that science is not meant for the exploitation of nature, but for, like, we are trying to get to the point where it is sustainable.
I don't think so. I think it's so.
And there's the Green New Deal.
But even that is the exploit. Even that is still the manipulation of the material world for comfort and profit. Like, it's even by slapping sort of sustainability on it is like,
what if different people who profit, I guess, is that your...
No, it's more like if you want to have a stronger sense of the understanding of how the classical mind understood science, you would find it more closely reading like Angry Wendell Berry than you would reading like a sustainability-minded tech bro. Even if they're talking solar panels and batteries, like even still with batteries, you're still having to strip mine the earth for cobalt and rare earths. And,
But my point is that we're moving back in that direction. I rarely hear the sentiment like men becoming master of nature anymore. It is us trying to come into conformation with our ecosystem.
No, we still think that there's a technological save for example, global warming. We think there's a technology fix that will solve that. Whether it's like seeding clouds or
carbon capture.
Carbon capture. We think there's some sort of technological fix than actually reducing
energy usage or production, manufacturing.
Farming practices. Farming practices are the biggest one.
Yeah.
Is
instead of factory farming, having many small farms.
Yeah, and even the way that fields are plowed. Like if you look at the this is taking us a little further afield, but if you look at sort of the carbon emissions globally, the amount of carbon that's emitted that's coming from pollution is a significant number, but it absolutely pales in comparison with this seasonality carbon emission that comes with everybody at once plowing their fields. So when farmers are plowing their fields, the amount of sequestered carbon in the organic matter in the ground gets released into the atmosphere, and so the sort of the modern farming practices that we have that we think are sort of timeless from big machines 200 years ago are actually any carbon that's sequestered in soil is being sort of put back into the atmosphere. Right. Anyway, but my point being that like 9 out of 10 people on the street, if you ask them what's going to get us out of this mess, is scientists will figure it out. And what they mean is we will come up with some sort of technological solution. And that technological solution is some kind of manipulation of creation for something that we think will make it better. And then there's all sorts of unintended consequences.
Okay, sure.
Anyway.
But what is the overall point? How does this relate back to your, is this what's forbidden knowledge question?
So my overall point is that second Adam, is that sentiment that Adam, after the fall, talking to Michael brings, is that a more mature Adam? Is that the sentiment that we should have, which is, I don't need to know anything more. All I need to do is be good and obedient.
Yes.
Are we losing something of the Flammarion engraving Adam?
Yes.
And is that a good thing?
Yeah, this just because we're referencing all of our old episodes, we did an episode on usury forever ago, and any form of interest used to be bad, right? Clear cut. Mm-hmm. Well, once we allowed debt to proliferate, once there was more and more debt, there was more and more growth, which has given us wealth, which has made this country wealthy and many countries wealthy. Well, that doesn't mean usury isn't still bad, right? There's a good thing to get from a bad thing, and debt might be one of those things. So could both be true, that we lose something if you don't have that anxiety, maybe that might be the wrong word, but that need for information that Adam 1 has, we might lose something by moving to Adam 2. It's still better to be Adam 2 than Adam 1. Mm-hmm. Can't those both be true?
I feel like curiosity, this impulse of Adam, is one of those human impulses that can be wielded for ill or good, like sexuality, right? And like, I eventually came down to the question of art. Like, is art a thing okay for Christians to do? It is a human expression. It is, like, I could spend my time better evangelizing on the street, right? So why do art? And it seems to be one of those things that is inherently built into every human that we do not universally see as ill. Like, very rarely do you see someone say, like, curiosity is just a bad thing. I think it's how you wield that curiosity that can make it good or ill. If you use that curiosity to study divinity, that is a great use of it. If you use it to study, like, weaponry for war, well, maybe that's a different negative use of it. I think there are certain uses that will bring us into a place of praise and greater appreciation of the divine, and there's a way that we can use it to, say, master nature in an unhealthy way. But I don't think the impulse to understand is a negative. That seems to be built into the human person in a way that isn't necessarily bad. Like, I don't spend my time judging people who are curious.
Mm-hmm. Within certain bounds. Right. And that's to say, again, when curiosity is called a sin, it could be either a problem of the object of the curiosity or the methods of the curiosity. If I become so curious that, like, I stop talking to my wife and my kid, like, that's an inordinate curiosity. But yeah, within bounds, the desire to learn more is a good thing.
Or if I'm curious about the human body and my method is to take apart live humans.
Yeah,
right?
You go murder people and then, like, vivisect. Yeah. So there would be problems with that. Yeah.
Now, AJ, I had a question for you. You were talking about how that once Adam has the full of history, once he has the whole story, then he can say, now I've got it, and now I see, that obeying is best. Do you think there's something wrong if he hasn't had that full of history, but he still comes to the conclusion it's good, it is right to be a good boy and to obey God, but he doesn't have the history, he doesn't have the vision that Adam has.
This is what I believe childlike faith is. Mm-hmm. The thing that is, like, it's good to come as a child. That doesn't mean it's good to come as someone who, like, children are kind of petty and terrible to each other. And so what does Jesus mean when he says it is good to come with a childlike faith? I think this is it. There are certain places where we won't fully understand the whole story, right? Mm-hmm. Where I don't understand why God is asking me to do a thing. It doesn't really make sense to me. The imagery, like, for example, C.S. Lewis talks about how the imagery of heaven seems to repulse him. Why do I want to walk on big golden streets? Can you imagine the glare? Ugh, it's exhausting, right? Why do I want that? And so there are points where we will not understand why we are asked to do a thing. And I see that in my students, right? They think they can handle certain sins that they don't see what will happen 30 years down the line. like I do, someone who has lived in that sin for 30 years, right? And sees how damaging it is. So that is living in obedience without the full story. But that doesn't mean that children also aren't curious, right? Children get to come and they obey, but they also, if I know children, they ask why. Why am I doing? I will still do the dishes, but why do I have to do the dishes? Why can't we just eat off of dirty plates? It's food on there anyway. It's just dried food, right? Why can't I do that? And the parent says, well, because things grow in there. You don't know to understand, microbes yet, but that'll make you sick. And the kid goes, oh, right. So
This sounds like an argument
questions.
that you've had before.
Nope.
Okay, good.
Just one little aside before we move on. So if people are like, did Graham just say that plowing fields is destroying the world? Just to sort of finish that thought with a little more nuance than maybe I presented it. The depletion of grasslands globally is on a really fascinating topic. And so like the Dust Bowl of the 30s, we, in the United States, and all the way up through Canada, the grasslands of North America had 2 feet of rich topsoil from grasslands being grazed and not touched. And then that topsoil and there was rich, fertile land that was farmed for 150 years without any sort of replenishment. And then that topsoil is now gone. And that those uncovered farmlands, the actual grasses of the prairies insulate vast sections of the world. And when that grass is gone, those areas of the world take on more desert-like climates. They get very hot during the day and very cold at night. And that depletion of grasslands is a major contributor to global temperature, as well as carbon sequestration is no longer happening. This is why everybody should be really interested in preserving prairie grasses, but no one does because they're not as sexy as like giant redwood trees. Grasslands are kind of boring.
Sure.
But anyway,
Right.
just to
I
put
happen to find grassland very sexy.
so just to put a little finer point on that, so you're not thinking like,
Oh my.
Graham thinks like plowing is destroying the world. No, it has to do with sort of the a method of farming that sort of took off after the Industrial Revolution that didn't bring any nutrients back to the soil. Anyway, and then I guess sort of the last sort of thought of this is that different eras of Christian history have kind of landed on one side or the other of this natural tension that I think is in the faith. And I don't think it's a tension that is meant to be resolved. I think it's a tension that is meant to keep things in balance. So much so that the kinds of relationships that a young Christian man has with knowledge and science and the world and understanding his relationship with God, I think has to look differently than an older man who is nearing death and his relationship with science and progress and technology and God. But there's also been times in Christian history where the sort of the cultural view of that has sort of leaned more heavily on one way, on that sort of one way than the other, and we see that in how the church has talked about what history is. And I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, that we as modern people live in a linear view of history. And most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, live with some sort of linear view of history that takes a slope upwards, a progressive view of history. That as time moves forward, things are getting better. And this is not without merit. You look back at, 100 years ago, and you're like, things are a lot better than they were.
We are no longer dumping poop buckets into the street.
That's right. We have internal.
Most of us.
We
I
have
was going to
plumbing.
say, yeah.
I mean, we have.
We only do it for fun now. Is that good? Yeah, good.
There's a vaccine for the coronavirus that came about in a year.
Right. It's crazy.
It's crazy, and the despite the scary like Facebook propaganda or whatever, what actually is happening with a virus or with a vaccine, and also this new vaccine, is just mind blowing. Like there is progress being made in the world, and so as modern people, our view of history tends to be linear. and progressive. And this sort of kind of fits that sort of earlier Adam model, or that side of the faith that has that native inborn human curiosity of wanting to know, of wanting to improve. God did, after all, put Adam and Eve in a wilderness and instead turn it into a garden. There is inherently built into the Christian understanding of the world progress, making things better.
Right.
And in the church, that is unwinding the ravages of sin in the hearts of individuals and in communities. This is the job of the church. So there is a progressive side of the Christian faith. But then there's also this sort of, not stagnant, that sounds bad, but there is also a motionless, contemplative side of the Christian faith that also says, and this is maybe what the students are getting at, that it is finished. Things are done. The story has already been written. The battle has been won. No amount of your piety or no amount of your efforts are going to make God any more godly or is going to make his kingdom any more or less triumphant. And there is I'm no mystic, but there's always been those voices in the Christian faith that say paring down your life to just the contemplation of God and prayer is sort of this pure and rewarding battle. And that always sounds so crazy. And so and that also has its own view of history. And for those of you who, I do recommend the book Laurus as an example of an honest attempt at portraying that view of history. Some of the characters, some of the more sort of holy characters end up having visions of history that transcend sort of linear. There's characters that, one character when he is near death looks up and he is seeing an event that takes place in like 1990s, I think, Belgrade or something, right? Like there's just sort of these different stories, and when one character falls in love, there's another story of another character in the 1970s who falls in love. So there's this this sense that the experiences of the human life in 16th century Russia are the same experiences of the human life in 1970s Lithuania, which are the same experiences of human life in the 2020s Texas, right? That
with
there is
small changes in sanitation.
Yes, with small yes. So, and that reality that if God is outside of history, when he is viewing human history, he is not seeing a progressive line moving up and to the right.
Right.
Seeing a slinky.
He is seeing, well, yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it. Like he is seeing
It's
like
a stacked
coiled, he is seeing like history as one entity. I was going to say time was a flat circle.
Yeah, thank you.
You can't reference that show on this podcast.
Oh, sorry. I thought season 1 of True Detective was great.
Never watched it.
But
just saw the meme.
But just this idea that like there is that view of human history and that had its heyday in the Christian faith,
right.
And I kind of see that playing out in this progression of the character of Adam in Paradise Lost. What the takeaways are from that, I have no idea, but...
Can I ask?
Yeah, go for it.
Don't talk to snakes.
Don't talk to snakes. So the other thing that I have bouncing in my head is that, so even in talking about like a sin of curiosity or a problem, AJ's comments about there are bad ways to approach the object of curiosity, Adam before the fall does not have sin. So it's more like an innocence that he has before the fall. Is Milton portraying Adam as growing up through this event, or is that overstating it?
I don't know. It's hard not to read it that way.
Okay.
But Adam's problem was not curiosity.
Correct,
I mean, he aimed a little higher, but if anyone had a sinful curiosity, it was Eve.
Her beauty?
Yeah, well, she wanted to know what it was like to be angelic, right? She wanted to be beauty, and so I don't think that there was unfair. The sin of and that's the thing is I don't think the sin of curiosity was their sin, right? Adam's sin was uxoriousness, and which means being too doting on his wife, and then Eve's sin was wanting to reach the final form too quickly.
Yeah. Although Adam's sin in choosing Eve over God. So you would think that Adam would be like, oh, the fruit, I can know more. Right. And that's not how Milton portrays it. But it's that Adam, by knowing and loving Eve, Adam's sort of experience of the world is more expansive. Just by like when you are married to when you love somebody in a relationship and are sharing an experience with somebody, your knowledge of that experience is expansive. Mm-hmm. We've all had that feeling of you did something cool and you're like, oh man, I wish AJ was here to experience this with me. Or maybe if you and I go to a movie and we talk about the movie, you'll say, oh, I really loved it when X, Y, and Z happened. I'll be like, I didn't even notice that, right? Mm-hmm. So when you experience life with somebody, you have a more expansive understanding of that. And Adam worries about losing that expansion of experience by losing Eve and him still existing. He's worried about going back to that point where Mr. Dog had Mrs. Dog and Mr. Bird had Mr. Bird, Mrs. Bird, and he had nobody. Right. And so that luxuriousness, that sort of deference to Eve is that Adam is choosing to fall so that he can still have experience with Eve, and it's the wrong choice.
Yeah, so maybe that's I'm wondering then if there's, instead of a rejection of Adam 1 in favor of Adam 2, is it Adam 1 is still in Adam 2?
Yeah.
So there's still that desire for more knowledge, and I think that was the nuance AJ was pulling out, that yes, there are things that he doesn't have to be anxious about knowing, but he can still have that childlike wonder in addition to a security that even if I don't learn those things, even if I deny myself certain knowledge, what you're talking about of his relationship with Eve, he's still going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. History's still going to turn out the right way.
Well, and we can highlight that his curiosity when he was asking questions of the angels was not censured.
It wasn't bad.
And that didn't make him fall.
Right.
So that would be an innocent, even good expression of curiosity.
Yeah, one little last note to put on this is, I can't remember who, I think may have been Lewis talking about it in his introduction to Paradise Lost. But it's that when we think of Adam and Eve in the garden, we often think that they are perfect. But that's not the case. You can be sinless without having been perfected. And in fact, Adam and Eve were supposed to perfect themselves sinlessly while working in the garden. And there's this sense that they can be without sin, but not final, not finished yet. And that trips up students a lot in thinking
like
that
half-carved marble.
Yeah. Like being
the David
wrong,
not yet done.
Right. Being wrong on a math test isn't a sin. Like if you got the sum wrong, you haven't sinned. Just like if Adam gets something wrong in the garden, he doesn't realize the gravity of Satan's presence. That's not a sin, it's just not perfect. So that kind of nuance, I think, also plays into this where, so maybe you were saying, is Adam more mature at the end of it? I don't know if he's more mature, but he's definitely, even though sin has entered into him, he seems to be like more perfected after the fall. Sure. Which is this sort of paradox of Felix culpa, the paradox of that the fall ended up being a fortunate fall. But that gets into, I don't know, that one's
it's failing upwards. I've read books by CEOs about that.
Failing upwards.
Got to fail upwards.
It's Richard Rohr, isn't it?
Yeah. But anyway, it's that one gets into a little bit more of a bonkers thing. It's like, okay, was the fall a good thing? But anyway, so this is just thoughts on man and curiosity from these sort of two portrayals of Adam and angels.
Sure.
From the book. And that's it.
That's great.
Well, cool. Thank you so much, Graham. And I did all of our, back matter at the front. I made it front matter.
Yeah.
So we're just about finished. We are happy to be back. I know that I'm happy to be back in this chair with my bros talking about books and stuff.
Same.
And we are happy that you're listening.
Cool.
And if you want to listen more, well, tune back in next week.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? We got more coming for you.
Rock and roll.
All right. Thanks a ton, everybody. And this is See You Later from Classical Stuff.
Bye.
Bye.